College exams, judicial exams, CLAT, and UPSC are all difficult exams to take. Now, the law of tort is one subject you'll have to take while rendering all of these exams. And today I'll be explaining you the law of tort, including the nature, specific definitions by philosophers, the essentials of tort, and landmark judgments and principles of tort used in this judgment that you can use to pass all of these exams. But before we get into all of that, make sure you subscribe to India Legal, and if you're new here, welcome back. I'm Saibi Wade from India Legal. Now, what is tort? The term tort is French in origin, and it is synonymous with the word wrong. The word tort originates from a medieval Latin word, tortum, which means twist, and it implies a conduct which is tortious or twisted. Now, tort arises when someone breaks a duty. This is not necessarily from a contract, but it is an action that must give rise to a legal claim, which is compensation, or it can be in form of damages that must be claimed and it can be recoverable. Okay, so let's go into the definitions of tort, because as law students and as lawyers, you must be told that you need to give references, you need to provide specific reference when writing exams. So I'll be providing you with the specific definitions of tort and where you can reference them from. Now, Section 2, Clause M of the Limitation Act addresses tort as a civil wrong. That is not just exclusively a breach of contract or a breach of trust. Now let's go to the philosophers of tort. According to Salmond, a tort is a civil wrong for which remedy is a common law action for unliquidated damages. Now, unliquidated damages are exclusively for a breach of contract or the breach of a trust, or other than that, merely an equitable obligation. While Clerk and Lindsay describes tort as a wrong which is independent of a contract for which the appropriate remedy is common law action. Now, Sir Frederick Pollock defines the law of tort as civil wrongs which are collectively in names for the rules governing many species of liability, which, although their subject matter is wide and varied, but have certain broad features in common and are enforced by the same kind of legal process. And these are subject to similar exceptions. Lastly, Winifred. Now I'm going to explain Winifred's definition in details. Firstly, Winifred defines tort as a tortious liability which arises from a breach of duty, and this is primarily fixed by law. Now, this duty in which Winifred talks about is a duty towards persons generally, and this is a breach which is redressable by an action for unliquidated damages. Now, Winifred's definition is actually very important for law students and for lawyers, because in Winifred's definition, she highlights three different key elements. Firstly, a duty primarily fixed by law. Now, when we talk about tort law, we talk about a duty or an action that must be carried out, and that duty must be established by law. Now, this must not be through agreements or between parties. Now, in tort law, a duty of care is an obligation to an act in which there is a certain way to prevent unforeseeable harm to others. Now, this duty is usually determined by the law, and this is not something that can be altered or eliminated by an agreement between parties. So what I'm trying to say is that the idea behind this principle is that certain responsibilities exist regardless of any contractual agreement between individuals or entities. Now, even if these two parties agree that on a particular course of an action in a contract, they cannot be free of the legal duty imposed by the law if their actions result in harm to others. In other words, parties cannot use contractual agreements to escape liability for negligence or other tortious acts. Let's take, for example, the case of Verlands versus Fesher in 1868. Now, the facts of this case was Ryland, who is a defendant in this case, employed contractors to build a reservoir in his land. Now, the contractors negligently constructed a reservoir causing it to burst and flood Fescia's neighboring coal mine. The central issue was whether Rylands could be held liable for the damages caused by the escaping water, despite the absence of negligence on his part. Now, the court judgment was held in favor of the plaintiff, establishing the principle of strict liability. Now, I won't go further in strict liability because I'll be making another video for the principle of strict liability. Now, in this case, the court stated that the defendant was responsible for any harm caused by the escape of a dangerous thing from his land, even though he wasn't responsible for the dangerous thing that happened in his land. Now, I'll be going into the second element of Winifred's definition. Now, according to Winifred's definition, the second element is a duty towards persons generally. In tort law, there are certain duties that everyone is expected to follow and to avoid causing harm to others. Now, these duties are broad and they apply to persons generally. For example, everyone has a duty to not act negligently and cause harm to others. However, there are situations where it might be unclear who exactly these people in general are. Unlike contracts where duties are specific and they are agreed upon between individuals and particular persons. Tort duties are more like general rules that everyone is supposed to follow. This can sometimes make it a bit ambiguous or unclear in certain cases. When you have a contract or a quasi-contractual obligation, the duties are usually more specific and they are directed towards a particular individual involved in the agreement. There is a clear understanding of who owes what to whom. Now let's come to the third element, an action for unliquidated damages. Tortious liability involves seeking unliquidated damages, where the amount is usually at the court's discretion. Now, let me break it down for you in simple terms. When we talk about tortious liability, it means seeking compensation for a harm or a damage that has been caused by someone's wrongful actions. Now, there are two types of damages that can be claimed: liquidated damages and unliquidated damages. The first one, which is liquidated damages, this is when a specific amount is already agreed upon, like in advance. It's like having a set of number in a contract that says, if this goes wrong, you owe me exactly this much. Now, unliquidated damages is like asking the court to decide how much money should be paid as compensation. There's no fixed or predetermined amount. It is up to the court to figure out what would be fair based on the circumstances. It's a bit like saying I've suffered harm and I want the court to decide how much money we make up for it. Now let's go directly into the essentials of tort. Now, when we discuss the essential elements of a tort and what would constitute as a tort under the law of tort, there are three elements that would constitute. First, a wrongful act or an omission. Secondly, legal remedy. And thirdly, legal damage. Now, for a tort claim to be well-founded, there has to be a wrongful act or omission on a part of a person, and that would cause legal damage to another. And that damage or wrongful act committed must give rise to legal remedy. This brings us to the objectives of tort. Now, when we talk about the objectives of the law of tort, we talk about why do we need to understand the law of tort? Why is it compulsory for people to know what the law of tort is? First and foremost, the main importance and the goal of the law of tort is to fully compensate the victim for the loss suffered. Another importance and the goal of the law of tort is to prevent the continuation or repetition of harm. This is usually done by issuing or passing an injunction. Now, what do I mean by that? Preventing the continuation of harm through the issuance of orders or injunction is a legal concept aimed at stopping a party from engaging in certain actions that may cause harm or damage to someone. Now, you might be wondering, what is an injunction? An injunction is a court order that requires an individual or an entity to either perform or refrain from specific orders. Now, there are two types of injunction. First, we have the prohibitory injunction, which prevents certain actions, and the mandatory injunctions, which require specific actions to be taken. Another very important goal and objective of the law of tort is to protect the rights of individuals, rights which are of course recognized by the law. And another very important objective of the law of tort is to determine the rights between the parties to a dispute, ascertaining the legal entitlements and obligations of individuals or entities involved in a conflict or in a disagreement. So if you've stayed till the end of this video, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you've understood the law of tort. Now, in the next video, I'll be making the different landmark judgments about the law of tort. So do subscribe and stay tuned to India Legal.